Do you know who I am? While we're still rolling, you just want me to do it again? Okay. My name's Skot Deeming. I think I would call myself an artist, a maker, a scholar. I'm trying to finish my PhD right now. And I'm writing about sort of the history of the action figure as a media form. And I also make toys. Bit of a magpie that way. Put a shiny thing on the street somewhere and I'll sort of skitter towards it. I also have ADHD, so that explains the magpie side of it. Toys are a really important part in the matrix of the marketing on the one side and the branding on the other, but also on the storytelling. Because characters, when we hold them physically in our hands, there's a primacy there that connects us back to our experiences of all of the stories that we've already watched. So a bootleg, ultimately, I mean, bootleg as a term comes from, it's really funny, comes from prohibition in alcohol. Like having a bootleg meant that maybe you had a flask in your boot. You were making illegal alcohol during the prohibition in the United States. And so it's unsanctioned outlaw practices. My interest in bootleg toys actually came from my experience curating a bootleg video game arcade at the Museo del Juguete Antiguo in Mexico City. I spent a summer there. And I kind of fell in love with bootleg toy culture as much as the game culture. And I discovered things like lucha libre culture, which like totally knocked my socks off, and bootleg toy culture. For me, I love it because it's about like taking and granting access to things. The other part of the making side of it is that my grandfather actually was a model maker and made model military figurines and cast them in metal and painted them. And so part of the material practice, it was really interesting coming back to it when I fell in love with this toy culture. And then I came home to Montreal and I started making my own. I go to thrift stores and buy bits and pieces, right? And start putting figures together. And then eventually I would start using silicone to make molds and then using resin to cast in those molds. And instead of making just a one-off, I'd make like 10 or 5 or 20 or whatever I felt like. And what was interesting at this time is that my father also still had all of my grandfather's old model making tools. He had passed away when I was 17. So this is years and years later, and he gave them to me, and I still use them now when I'm making. So there's this like legacy of my grandfather's hobby practice that I get to sort of participate in every time I make, but also sort of the broader sort of political terms of access and appropriation that I'm interested in. And then I make molds out of silicone. And then once I have a silicone mold made, I use 2-part liquid plastic called like urethane resins or epoxy resins. And when you mix them together, there's a chemical reaction and they solidify and turn into solid plastic. Sometimes I will have an idea that will just stick in my brain for something very specific. And I will just pursue it. But there's something really intuitive about that thrifting process that I mentioned. It's kind of going and like flipping through the bags. Sometimes it'll just be like, I'll just open the bin and I'll pull out like a head and a body and, start just playing around with configurations and see what I can do with it. One of my favorite pieces that I do is a piece called My Little Bantha. The Bantha is a sort of pack or a herd, not a herd animal. What do you call them? Like a beast of burden in the Star Wars universe. And I cast them and paint them in pastel colors and then put like bright, colorful fun fur on them. And the packaging I made looks like a My Little Pony package. And it even comes with a comb so you can brush them. And it's sort of this idea of like, if you look at Star Wars historically and toxic masculinity, like I'm kind of queering the Star Wars space with that work a little bit. And I really liked that about it. Let's be honest, it's really hard to find, I think we're all striving to find hope every day. And this is a space where I can find that. I get to connect with my relationship with my grandfather, you know, in a material way by using his tools. But also, my grandfather clearly suffered PTSD in World War II and never talked about it. That generation never talked about that stuff. And his making was clearly a way for him to deal with that. I also am a trauma survivor, and my toy making was also part of the fabric of that recovery for me. I think that's why when I'm feeling stressed out about the world, I'll come here even just for an hour or two, and I'll paint a thing, or I'll sculpt a thing, or I'll like just pull out a bin of toys and like just start cutting them up and gluing them together and taking them apart. And boy, is it so fulfilling and satisfying in a way that I never fathomed it could be. It just gets you out of your head. And I think as a result of that too, it meant that I ended up spending more time here. Very much in the same way when I came to this, like after Mexico, after this PTSD diagnosis, like that feeling of feeling connected to my grandfather and sort of his healing process, like coming to the studio and making felt like a way to heal and recover. And so that just is where I leaned as much as I could in my free time.